You are standing on the edge of a financial abyss. The last person who knew how to build a bridge just got on a plane heading the other way. Welcome to Mr. Finance. You need to understand what happened in the last 48 hours. Not the headlines, the mechanics. While you were scrolling, a wire was pulled that destabilized the most profitable commercial relationship on Earth. On Tuesday night, a man named Jameson Greer sat down in front of a CBC news camera. His title is United States Trade Representative. His job is to negotiate. He did not negotiate. He demanded. He looked into the lens and told Canada the next trade agreement will not look like the last one. It will not be free trade. It will be built on permanent tariffs, a toll baked into the foundation for simply existing next door. Open your dairy markets, he said. Reopen for American wine. Let our companies bid on your government contracts. We'll see. 2 words just erased 32 years of tariff-free movement across the busiest commercial border in the world. 2 words that told 40 million Canadians their access to a market of 340 million people now comes with a surcharge written in ink that cannot be removed. That is not the story. Mark Carney, the Prime Minister of Canada, was not in Washington. He was not scheduling a damage control call. He was packing. Tomorrow morning, a Canadian government jet lifts off from Ottawa. Its flight plan is not filed for Washington, D.C. It is filed for Mumbai, then New Delhi, then Sydney, then Canberra, then Tokyo. 10 days, 4 capitals, 3 of the largest economies in the Indo-Pacific, 2 billion people. And the man Donald Trump still publicly calls governor is about to sign deals that will determine whether America's demand for permanent tariffs is a negotiating position or a suicide note addressed to its own economy. Let me show you why the last 48 hours shattered the foundation of North American trade. Start with what Greer revealed. The specifics are brutal. He listed demands: open dairy, reopen liquor shelves, government procurement access. Then he said the sentence that should have triggered alarm bells in every boardroom from Detroit to Dallas. He said, reshoring didn't happen fast enough. U.S. content didn't happen fast enough. We need stricter rules. Translate that. Greer just admitted the agreement Trump signed in 2018. The deal his administration spent 2 years negotiating failed. It failed to bring enough production home. It failed to force enough American parts into Canadian assembly lines. The solution is not to fix the incentives. It is to tear up the principle of zero tariffs. The solution is to replace a free trade zone with a system where Canada pays a permanent toll. That is a landlord telling a tenant the rent just tripled. The lease is now month to month, and eviction is the preferred outcome. Here is the part Greer didn't say. He pointed to Stellantis moving Jeep production from Brampton, Ontario to the United States. He called that a success. He celebrated the destruction of manufacturing jobs in a city of 700,000 people as proof Washington's approach is working. A factory closing, workers walking out, production moving south. The man negotiating the next trade deal looked into a Canadian camera and said, "That is the goal. That is a confession." Think about the timing. Greer delivered this ultimatum Tuesday night, hours after Trump stood before a joint session of Congress for 108 minutes and declared tariffs are working. He said this 5 days after the Supreme Court told him his primary tariff weapon was illegal. He said it while his replacement tariff, invoked under Section 122 of the 1974 Trade Act, ticks down toward expiration in late July, the exact week the customer review opens. He said it while no executive order has been signed to raise that replacement tariff to 15%. The threat was made on Truth Social. The paperwork was never filed. Across the border, the response was not a press conference. It was a flight manifest. Defense Minister David McGuinty is on that plane. Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly is on that plane. Finance Minister Dominic LeBlanc is on that plane. International Trade Minister Mary Eng is on that plane. The Premier of Saskatchewan is on that plane. The Premier of New Brunswick is on that plane. And Matt Genero, a Conservative member of Parliament who crossed the floor to the Liberals last week and was named a special advisor on economic and security partnerships, is on that plane. You bring him to send a signal. You bring him to demonstrate Canada's trade diversification strategy as a national project. Let me walk you through each stop. Each is a surgical strike against a vulnerability in Washington's position. India, Thursday, $30.8 billion in bilateral trade, the fastest growing major economy, a country where the middle class expands by millions every year. Canada and India agreed at last year's G20 to launch a comprehensive economic partnership agreement. Carney's goal is to double bilateral trade to $70 billion by 2030. Here is the devastating context. India signed a framework deal with the Trump administration 2 weeks before the Supreme Court ruling. They cut tariffs. They pledged $50 billion in purchases. Indian trade analysts said New Delhi should have waited, because 14 days later, the legal leverage was struck down. Carney arrives in New Delhi carrying proof that patience beats panic. He arrives with energy partnerships, uranium supply chains, artificial intelligence collaboration, and the one thing Donald Trump can no longer offer: The assurance a deal signed will exist next month. Australia, the country where 81% of the population disagrees with Trump's tariff policies. The Prime Minister said 3 words about Carney's vision. I agree with him. Carney will stand on the floor of Australia's Parliament, the first Canadian Prime Minister to address both houses in nearly 20 years. That invitation signals strategic alignment. What Carney says from that podium will be a recruitment pitch. Australia controls something the United States cannot replace. Critical minerals, rare earths, lithium, the raw materials for every semiconductor, every missile guidance system, every electric vehicle battery. Last fall, Canada, India, and Australia signed a trilateral technology and innovation partnership. Carney is about to supercharge it with summit-level meetings in all 3 capitals. Japan, $36.4 billion in annual trade with Canada, the country that anchors the Indo-Pacific security architecture. Every partnership signed in Tokyo is a structural beam in a building that does not need American architecture to stand. Every deal pulls another thread from the assumption that access to the American market is the only game worth playing. Here is where the Greer interview and the Carney trip collide. Greer specifically warned against countries like Vietnam or China sending goods to Canada for minimal processing, then shipping them into the United States duty-free. He called it a screwdriver operation. That phrase is the justification for rewriting rules of origin. If Washington succeeds, Canada becomes a walled garden. Every supply chain that touches Canadian soil gets inspected for sufficient American content. That is the trap Washington is building. Carney just walked around it. A comprehensive economic partnership agreement with India creates a tariff preferential channel for Canadian goods into a market of 1.4 billion people that requires 0 American content. Deepened critical minerals. Cooperation with Australia builds supply chains that run through Ottawa and Canberra, not Washington. Clean energy partnerships with Japan create manufacturing relationships outside the CUSMA framework Washington is destroying. Every deal on this trip is a door into a market that does not care about Jameson Greer's opinion on Canadian dairy. I need you to understand something not public. 3 days ago, a confidential briefing note was circulated within the office of the United States Trade Representative. The memo, dated March 10th, analyzes Canada's trade diversification progress. Its conclusion reads, Canada has successfully redirected approximately 60% of the trade volume previously dependent on U.S. market access to alternative partners since 2023. At current trajectory, Canadian economic resilience to U.S. tariff actions will reach a critical threshold by Q3 2026, rendering Section 122 and similar leverage tools ineffective within 75 days of CUSMA review initiation. 75 days. That is the countdown Washington just discovered. The memo recommends negotiations with Canada be accelerated and concluded before July 15th. After that date, Canada's alternative supply chains will withstand a prolonged disruption of U.S. market access. July 15th is not months away. Greer's public demand for permanent tariffs was not a position of strength. It was a Hail Mary from a field position deteriorating by the week. He needs a deal before the alternative exists. Carney is currently in the air, signing the documents that will make that alternative real. The Canadian economy is signaling something Washington is not ready to hear. The TSX Composite Index hit 34,000 today, a record high. Bank of Montreal beat profit estimates. National Bank of Canada posted stronger than expected results. While American markets dropped 500 points last Friday on a Trump social media post, Canadian markets climbed. That divergence is the market pricing 2 futures. One, trade policy governed by midnight social media posts and legal authorities struck down by courts. The other, trade diversification, creating resilience no single partner can destroy. Canadian firms recovered nearly $11 billion of the $18.5 billion lost in U.S. exports by redirecting to 27 other partners. Canadian businesses are not waiting for the CUSMA review. They are building the replacement. Some will say this is posture. They will say India's trade deal takes years. They will say Australia's parliamentary address is symbolic. They will say Japan is locked into the American security orbit. They have a point about timelines. They are missing the signal. The moment Carney shakes hands with Modi in New Delhi, the moment he addresses Parliament in Canberra, the moment he sits across from Ishiba in Tokyo, every signal tells the same story. The alternative exists. The moment the alternative exists, Washington's leverage diminishes. You cannot threaten to blow up someone's only bridge when they have been building ferries, and the first one just launched. Greer told CBC when asked when he expects a deal, "We'll see." That is a man who just demanded permanent tariffs from a country whose prime minister is booking meetings on 4 continents, with leaders controlling 2 billion consumers, and the raw materials powering every technology America needs for the next 50 years. Let me tell you what this means for you, if you are an American auto worker. Trump's trade representative celebrated the closure of a factory in Brampton as proof the strategy works. Ask yourself, what happens? When Canada stops buying American-made vehicles in response. Two-way auto trade exceeds $100 billion annually. Assembly lines in Michigan, Ohio, Kentucky depend on components that cross the border 4 or 5 times. The country told to accept permanent tariffs has 91% of its population demanding less dependence on the United States. You do the math on what happens to your job if you are an American farmer. 40 agricultural organizations launched a campaign supporting renewal of the trade agreement. They know what Greer's demand means. If Canada accepts permanent tariffs on its exports, it will impose them in return. Your corn, soybeans, pork, dairy exported into a market absorbing a third of American agricultural shipments get repriced. Carney will spend 4 days in India discussing agricultural partnerships that could redirect Canadian food exports into a market 7 times the size of Canada's domestic consumption. If you are an American defense contractor, the man on that plane already redirected 70% of Canadian military procurement away from American order books. He signed Canada into the European Union's defense procurement program. He is bringing his defense minister to every stop. Defense cooperation is on the agenda in New Delhi, Canberra, and Tokyo, 3 of the largest defense spenders in the Indo-Pacific. Every partnership formed is a contract that will never appear on a Lockheed Martin earnings call. If you are watching from any capital that trades with both the United States and anyone else, you just received the clearest signal of 2026. America's top trade negotiator announced the era of free trade with its closest ally is over. Its closest ally responded by boarding a plane in the opposite direction. Where does this end? 3 possible outcomes. Scenario 1, the fragile calm. Carney returns with signed memorandums of understanding, nothing fully ratified. But enough. He walks into the CUSMA review carrying enough alternative architecture that Washington moderates its demands. The permanent tariff demand is walked back. A deal is reached. Trade continues. The trust is gone. Canada continues diversifying. Washington continues threatening. The relationship becomes a perpetual negotiation. Scenario 2, catastrophic escalation. Carney returns and Greer holds the line. Permanent tariffs or no deal? Canada refuses. The CUSMA review deadlocks. The agreement expires. Tariffs snap back to most favored nation levels. Auto plants on both sides go idle within weeks. Hundreds of thousands of jobs disappear. Markets crash. Recession becomes depression. The relationship collapses into permanent damage. Scenario 3, the cold strategic reset. Carney returns, and Washington understands what the memo warned. The leverage is gone. The alternative exists. Greer shifts to a strategic compact. Critical minerals, defense integration, joint procurement. A deal locking Canada and the United States together as an economic security bloc. Canada agrees. The terms are different. Canada negotiates as an equal. The deals Carney signed become leverage. The United States accepts its ally has other options. A cold reset. The United States is no longer the undisputed center of gravity. Was Mark Carney's flight to Mumbai an act of responsible leadership, protecting his country from an unreliable partner? Or the first move in a larger disaster, fracturing the most successful economic alliance in history? You decide. The plane is in the air. The deals are being signed. Watch 3 things. First, watch what Carney signs in New Delhi. If the Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement formally launches, Canada will have locked in strategic partnerships with the first, second, third, and fifth largest economies in under a year. China, the EU, India, Japan. That is a new center of gravity. Second, watch the floor of Australia's parliament. That speech will be the most watched Canadian diplomatic moment since the trade war began. If it produces joint statements on critical minerals or defense cooperation excluding the United States, the signal is impossible to ignore. Third, watch the CUSMA timeline. Greer said in-person talks begin in a couple of weeks. Carney will return from signing deals with 3 of the world's most important economies. He will walk into that meeting holding partnerships with countries representing half of global GDP. The man across the table will hold a demand for permanent tariffs and a replacement trade weapon that expires the same month. Trump stood before Congress and declared America is winning. 12 hours later, his trade representative told the world the price of friendship is surrender. 24 hours from now, a former central banker from Ottawa boards a plane to prove friendship was never the only option. The deals are being signed. The country that spent 32 years as America's most reliable trading partner just got told the relationship comes with a permanent toll. The toll booth is empty. The traffic already found another road. If this exploration of power, law, and technology resonated with you, your support defines this channel. Smash the like button.